Hi, it's Brittney Cooper. I'm back with Chapter 3 of Discovering Darklin. So let's get started. Chapter 3 is from the point of view of Tatting. "What are we going to do?" Tatting asked him over the phone comm. "Prepare to leave," said Zelon on the other end. His voice was crackling. The connection wasn't great. "Meet me here tomorrow," said Tatting, and switched off the phone comm. Seated at his old metal desk, he looked around his office. The faded blue walls, the scuffed floor, the liquor smell permeated with the lemon-scented cleaner Allie liked so much. It was a small office with a large closet that he had converted into a very small bedroom that held just a cot and some clothes. He exhaled and felt tears beginning to form in his blue eyes. It wasn't much, but it was his home, and it had been a good home to him and the girls. He had gotten so used to being here, running his business, and living a fairly quiet life with the girls. He knew he couldn't stay there forever. It had been so long, he worried that none of them would be prepared if it came to a fight. Plus, he was getting a little old for any more fighting. He did enough of that when he was younger. Tatting rubbed his eyes, as he could not have been sleeping well. He was having nightmares due to the news he recently received, and they varied each night. One of the girls would be bleeding out in his arms as he ran for their lives, while shots rang out around them. Some nights they were caught, others they were interrogated, then became a routine of waking up in a puddle of dampness with his gray hair soaked with sweat. He needed to focus and stop dwelling on the nightmares. Otherwise, he was going to drive himself crazy. Tatting pulled out the bottle of whiskey he kept in his desk and poured himself 2 fingers of the red liquor. He drank it in one drink and poured another 2 fingers. With his hand around the glass, he closed his eyes and tilted back his head. He thought back on his meeting that had just ended. An update on the current outbreak. Thousands had died on Leoterra, many of them children. The sickness didn't differentiate between adults, children, or even species. Only the camellias on Leoterra seemed naturally immune to the sickness, which is probably because they reside primarily in the gel ponds of the Leoterra's high hills. Camellias were the unintelligent frog-like creatures with orange scales and 3 eyes. They couldn't leave the ponds as they couldn't breathe outside of them, so they weren't exposed to the sickness. He already knew most of the information provided by the Laets at the meeting. Leoterra's residents, except for the camellias, including the Monids, Sulfilkas, and the dominant Laets, were convening panels to discuss beginning negotiations with the rebels. They were not happy Treslin targeted their people with the latest outbreak. Treslin would never claim responsibility. No human ever would. Treslin was the tyrant human leader of the humans who believed any species other than humans were scum and would kill as many as he had to in order to find the rebels. Thank the stars, there was no extermination of the population this time on Leoterra, like on Salisi 3 years ago, and Valenti 12 years before that, Tatting thought. No one at the meeting provided any information on the rebels' movements or current location, but he didn't expect the Laets to know that information. The phone call was the problem. Their cover here was blown. Zelon would be here tomorrow, and that would not be a good meeting. Tatting had to contact Kona and let him know he and the girls were coming. That was not going to be fun to do. Maybe Zelon would tell Kona for him, since Tatting was not Kona's favorite person. As he was contemplating the situation, a yell came from outside the office door. A moment later, the door crashed open, and Allie flung herself into the office with her big brown eyes burning with anger. Her short brown hair was sticking out in odd places, her purple-colored lips pursed so tightly he could only see a thin purple line where her mouth was. Mentally amending his previous thought about the quiet life, Giselle and Tatting lived a fairly quiet life. Allie had too much fire in her veins the last few years to ever live quietly again. He could hear her at night in the training room. At least one of them would be ready for a fight. "What's wrong?" He bolted to his feet, knocking his metal chair over and slopping red liquid all over his desk. The chair hit the floor with a clang. He was expecting Mull to be at the front door, and the anxiety must have shown on his face. Allie's angry expression faltered for a few seconds at the sight of Tatting's face. She did have a heart, it just didn't show up too often. Once she reclaimed her anger, she seethed. The back room door was broken open. I didn't even notice until I was almost done cleaning in there. "Oh no," he said softly. Allie whipped around and exited the office as quickly as she had entered, expecting him to follow her. That's just how she was. When she thought or believed something was important, it was always easier to agree with her. She had excellent instincts and was rarely wrong. It had become pretty easy to just go along with her since she had recovered from the trauma she had endured. He had gotten used to how she was. He followed her out of the office and caught up with her at the end of the hall going into the front room. "What's going on?" Giselle asked as Allie and Tatting passed through the front room. Giselle was keeping the only remaining customer of the night occupied. Well, she was behind the bar drinking whiskey mixed shots. She drinks too much. Jack was actually quietly staring at the outbreak broadcast. He didn't even seem to realize he was the only customer left. He shook his head slightly. "Don't worry about it," Tatting said firmly. He did not want any customer to know that Tattings had been robbed. Even though Jack was the only customer and was a regular, Tatting didn't trust him. There was something about Jack that just didn't feel right to him. If anyone discovered Tattings had been broken into, there would be break-ins every week, thinking Tattings was an easy target. Nansa was not a nice or safe city. Of course, the entire planet of Zanea, where Tattings was located, was not much better. 18 hours of darkness out of a 22-hour day makes it a pretty dangerous place to live. Most of the surrounding area takes care of each other, but there has been and always will be a lot of crime in the area. Tattings had good security. Every steel and diaglass plated door had 3 bolt locks. Each diaglass window had sliding steel shutters with multiple bolt locks. No cameras were installed because they could be easily accessed by outside entities. Very few places had cameras for that very reason. Tatting followed Allie through the front room where Giselle and Jack were to the door of the back room. She flung open the door and marched through. Tatting sped up to keep pace with her. He entered the back room, and the smell of lemons assaulted his nostrils. He inhaled quickly and sneezed. "You need to cut down on the cleaner," he announced to the back room. Allie was nowhere to be seen. Bar stools lined the far wall. Tables sat neatly in front of the bar stools. A bucket of gray water with an equally gray cloth hanging over the edge of the bucket sat on the floor. She did a good job, but where the hell did she go? "You coming?" Tatting's head snapped to the left. Allie's head was sticking around from the short hallway on the side of the back room. Her head disappeared. Tatting hurried to the hallway, which led him to the back door. It would be understandable that she wouldn't notice the broken lock sooner. The lock was still in place. The ends of all 3 of the lock bolts were still in the locking mechanism installed into the door frame, but the bolts were severed. The door was closed, but nothing was holding it shut. If he pushed on it, it would swing open to the back alleyway. Now he was very worried. Maybe they didn't have the time he thought they did. This happened today, he thought. He knew the locks were secured the night before. "What the hell did this?" demanded Allie as she flung her hand out to indicate the locks and looked from the locks to Tatting with anxiety plain on her face. Tatting was visibly shaken. "I don't know. It looks like mole tech." "Oh no," gasped Allie. We need to close up and get this door resecured. Go get Jack out of here and have Giselle get back here." Without complaint, Allie rushed out of the back room. Tatting quickly examined the door in Allie's absence. The door itself was not damaged. Only the Titan steel lock was completely destroyed. It definitely must be Mole Tech that did this. There was nothing known on the open market that could cut through Titan steel lock bolts like that. They had to be close to finding them. Mole wouldn't risk cutting this lock too far in advance of an attack as to be easily discovered. It's a good thing Allie was so vigilant about security and checked the doors and windows every night before heading upstairs. There was only one window in the back room. He checked and found the window's locks are securely bolted. He sighed in relief. Almost 10 minutes later, Allie finally returned with Giselle, who looked pleased about something. "What took so damn long?" he asked Giselle. She smiled. "Jack didn't want to leave. I finally had to bet him 5 packsets that he couldn't drain an ale like the Chandelight did." Giselle shook her jacket pocket and it rattled. She must have done well in tips tonight and then added Jack's 5 packsets on top of that. Then it registered what Giselle had said. "Shanlight? There was a Shanlight in here tonight? Why?" Tatting exclaimed. "Not sure. He met with Jack He was only here a short time, and no, I didn't hear what they talked about, said Giselle, anticipating his question. He had kept them a little too sheltered here, so they didn't know to be wary of certain species. However, both of them knew to be cautious of all strangers. He could not let them leave the bar too often. If someone recognized them from the posters, Mull would have found them years ago. Taddings didn't have too many customers that aren't regulars. He didn't advertise, and his business was generated mainly by word of mouth, which usually ensured a fairly tight-knit group who all knew each other. Strangers were just too dangerous. This was the sole reason the girls were never invited to any of his meetings. Allie said someone broke in, asked Giselle as she moved closer to the back door. Her smile disappeared and was replaced by a worried expression. Taddings showed Giselle the door. Who did this? She looked in disbelief from Taddings' worried face to Allie's angry one. She was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. Mull, said Tadding. Oh, shit, said Giselle. They found us? Why would they just break the lock and leave? She pointed at the broken lock. We were probably not meant to notice this, he said. Mull broke the lock to make it easier to get back in at a later time. It was by chance the broken lock was even discovered. If Allie had not been cleaning, this would never have even been noticed. They boarded up the door the best they could. All they had available was a thin piece of wood. Tadding hammered in nails to hold the wood over the lock while the girls brought over the extra bar stools and put in front of the back door. At least if someone got in before the door was fixed, they would hear it and would have time to defend themselves. Another lock would have to be bought and installed first thing tomorrow. You girls finish locking up and get home. There's a mess that needs to be mopped up first, said Giselle. Jack lost his bet, and there is ale everywhere when he practically vomited most of it onto the floor. Tadding laughed. Giselle had a warped sense of humor. She knew she would have a mess to clean up, but it had to be funny watching Jack trying to win that bet. It's not funny, it's more cleaning, stated Allie. Her purple lips were had almost disappeared again. Allie had no sense of humor whatsoever and was so serious all the time. He wished Allie was a little more like Giselle, but that won't happen. Well, when you're done locking up and cleaning, get home. I have a meeting with Zelon tomorrow, so I need you to be well rested in case there's trouble. Unfortunately, trouble was inevitable. And that's it for Chapter 3. Come back for Chapter 4. And if you can't wait, the link to the entire book will be in the description below. Please subscribe to my channel.